Serge King, bringing you a Huna study tape entitled Huna Looks at Religion. In the very early days of mankind, and even today among some peoples who live off the beaten track, religion was the center and foundation of society. There was no aspect of life which was not involved in some way with spiritual forces. Hunting, agriculture, house building, birth, marriage, and death were all religious matters. They were so because man related their whole life to causes greater than they. They recognized that the essence of life was in everything, and that everything was therefore sacred, a manifestation of some ultimate creative God of the universe. There was no separation between spirit and matter, for matter contained and was formed from spirit. The Hawaiian word for matter, mea, shows this interrelationship clearly. Me, M-E, means with, and ea means life, breath, spirit, dust and dirt. Matter is of the spirit, and even dust has some form of spiritual life energy. Everything is sacred. The word kahuna means priest, but it also means expert. Originally, all the experts in every field necessary to the well-being of the community were kahunas. There were kahuna agriculturalists, fishermen, hunters, carpenters, and craftsmen, as well as those who specialized in medicine, psychology, and the manipulation of unseen powers. This was the case not only in Hawaii, but in the rest of the world as well. Gradually, the time varying for different peoples, men began to forget the essential unity of all things, and in their minds they separated the spiritual from the material. Even priests made the mistake. The spiritual world became something far off, a distant place to which one would travel after death. The here and now material world was another thing entirely, though a link was still acknowledged. If the life were not lived according to certain ideals, there would be adverse effects in the hereafter. But that hereafter seemed so far away and unreal that the threat did not do much to change behavior unless death became extremely close. Other links between the spiritual and material were forged. God or the gods were always on the side of whoever called upon him or them in time of battle, whether offensive or defensive. And prayers directed to far-off heaven were sometimes answered and sometimes not. Meanwhile, men became more and more specialized until there were only certain ones who had the right to speak to God, or claim to. All the rest left the things of God to these particular men, and sometimes listened to what they had to say about God, and sometimes didn't. Religion became a thing of convenience. If it was advantageous to use it, it was used. If it was not, it was ignored. Or else its name was used to carry out actions totally opposed to its ideals. From time to time, men would appear who would try to bring men back to an acknowledgement of the true state of affairs. Jesus, of course, was one, as was Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Mohammed, and many others. Their pattern was almost identical. Difficult beginnings, acceptance by a few, acknowledgement by many, and distortion by the multitudes. And although they all said much the same thing, the believer in one is likely to consider the believer in another as an enemy. Does religion have to be as complicated as it seems? What is its purpose? What is its relation to science, to magic, to the study of psychic phenomena? Why should we have to bother with it at all? Can't we just leave it for Sundays? Is there a best religion? We'll take up these subjects now from the Huna viewpoint. Religion is generally considered to be the belief in a divine power or powers, which must be worshipped as the creator or creators, or ruler or rulers of the universe. The worship consists of certain acts which are thought to be pleasing to the divinity. Usually they are carried out with the hope of some reward, either immediate or postponed. Although general, and in general use, this is an extremely limited concept of religion. It is no wonder that the scientific-minded ignore it or abhor it. It seems to bear no relation to the day-to-day problems of living on this planet. Where is the proof that religion, as described above, has stopped war and murder, famine and pestilence, and so on? It has not. But then neither has science. Speaking broadly, religion has tried to depend on God while neglecting man, while science has tried to depend on man while neglecting God. There's no fulfillment in that either way. It is always helpful to get back to basics when trying to understand a complicated subject. Religion comes from a Latin word, religare, meaning to bind together. Now here is a key. Religion cannot be separated from the rest of life because all of life is bound together. It is one. The scientist working with atomic physics or simple chemical reactions is working with one aspect of God's creation. He is as wrong to say that his work has nothing to do with religion as the religious fanatic who refuses medical treatment because it is unnatural. Natural law is God's law, and nothing in this universe is unnatural. Both of the above persons are separating instead of binding. Akea Kamai is a Hawaiian word for scientist, philosopher, science and philosophy, and the literal translation is to desire wisdom. No categories of wisdom are delineated, no limits made. All knowledge is part of the same fund of universal knowledge. There is no separation between religion and science, except the false one constructed by half-blind men. In this regard, we can now look at the Kahuna word for religion and worship. It is the same for both. Ho'omana. And the translation is to make mana. How do we make mana? By proper breathing, good nutrition, chemical reactions, atomic reactions, mental techniques, mechanical means. In short, making mana is making use of all the wonderful potentials for using the universal energy that pervades every single bit of this magnificent universe. No restrictions, no limits. However, this is an orderly universe, and there are laws which govern its operation. An acorn will never grow into a peach tree. Oxygen and hydrogen alone will not make milk. Prayer by itself will not replace a severed limb. Only by following the laws can we be successful at anything we undertake. Otherwise, we risk no results at best, and disaster for ourselves and others at worst. Likewise, what we call magic is part of the same universal system. Magic in Hawaiian is kalakapua, with a code meaning of to release mana. The relation between magic and religion in Huna is obvious, but the same is true throughout the world. Even today, the rituals of such formal religions as Catholicism contain many practices which would be called magical in another context. No less magical is the group singing done in many Protestant services. Religion and magic cannot be separated because mana is generated and released in both. Even science gets mingled in. The ancient Babylonians calculated the motions of planets to a very high degree of accuracy, yet they considered each planet to be a god, and they used the knowledge for astrology. A modern scientist would think the Mayans were ridiculously superstitious, but with their magical religious system, they devised the most accurate calendar in the world, only recently surpassed. There are many more examples from India, China, and elsewhere, but the point to retain is that magic is science and technology under a different guise, religion by another name. And it too must follow the laws of the universe in order to be workable. The essential unity of all things is one of the most important lessons we have to learn. Yes, there is certainly diversity and individuality, but there's a unifying principle nonetheless. For instance, you may think you have nothing in common with a rock, but you do. You are both subject to gravity. You and everything on this earth are subject to gravity. A hypothetical intelligent visitor from another universe, not subject to gravity, might classify you as a subspecies of gravity-subject objects, a little lower than the rock because less stable. Of course, this sounds absurd, but it is no more so than some of the arbitrary classification systems that we ourselves have devised. We have become so habituated to some ways of separating and joining things which were originally done purely for convenience that we tend to accept the imaginary classifications as absolute fact. When such classifications are carried to their obvious conclusions, we can get some pretty strange results. This is particularly so in biology. St. Bernard dogs and Chihuahuas are supposed to be close relations, as are frogs and turtles, and snakes and crocodiles, rats and rabbits, tigers and pussycats. We admit that each set has similarities in biological structure, but we insist here that this is only one man-made way of grouping them. And it tends to break down seriously at times. In Africa, there is a shy animal that lives in rock piles. It is about a foot or two long and looks somewhat like a large rat. Among other differences, however, it does not have the rodent tooth structure. What it does have is a toe structure that resembles that of the elephant. So our most serious scientists have grouped it with the pachyderms. In the microscopic field, we bump into plant-like animals, or animal-like plants. Borderline creatures they are called, but it was man who drew the line and named it the border. And then there is that wonderful creature, the Australian platypus, a fur-coated, duck-billed, egg-laying, milk-giving, web-footed what's-it. Nature's mistake, they say. On the contrary, it is man's mistake for trying to mold nature to his own preconceptions. In the realm of physics, arbitrary classifications are breaking down every day. Matter and energy are becoming useless as descriptive terms. The electron seems to be both at the same time. Our modern tendency to separate religion from other aspects of life is another arbitrary and false form of classification. The only thing that can be classified is man's view of religion, his interpretation of it. Mana, the life force, can be made in many ways, but it is still mana. Truth can be likened to a perfect diamond with many facets. While in his physical form, man sees a limited number of reflections of the whole truth, but he still sees truth. Or truth can be pictured as a mountain peak, and around the base stand all the souls ever created. Some have started up the mountainside earlier than others. Some are sitting with their backs to the mountain. Some have stopped to rest, talk, or pick flowers on the way. There are as many paths to the top as there are souls, but some prefer to follow in the paths made by others. This makes no difference, since the object is to get to the top. Unfortunately, some get sidetracked and forget the object, either forging a never-ending horizontal trail at some level or wandering aimlessly around the side. And there are the few who think that everyone else's path must be easier than their own. They hop from path to path, backtracking at the first obstacle and starting over and over again. And finally, there are very few who, having made it to the top, come back down to help the discouraged, the strayed, and the weak. We should never condemn another person's search for the truth, or even his failure to search for it. Our own personal view is limited, remember. Though the higher our state of consciousness, the better our perspective. The better our perspective, however, the less inclined we will be to condemn. Tolerance is what we have to cultivate, but not in the sense of merely putting up with. The Huna word is ho'omanawanui, and it also means patience. Everyone, regardless of how it appears to us, is struggling upward. We must be patient in our own struggle and patient with the struggles of others. Huna neither recommends nor condemns any particular religion. Every religion contains elements of Huna because its knowledge is universal. Parts of it may be accepted or rejected, but any part which aids in a person's understanding of himself and helps him along his path is valuable and worthy for that reason alone. Huna can be accepted as a religion in its own right, but it can also be used as a fund of knowledge for the strengthening of your own beliefs. Use what you can use. Consider and test that which you have difficulty in understanding. Have patience with what you cannot accept. To summarize briefly, religion, science, magic, psychology, all stem from the same truth. All find their efficacy through the operation of interrelating laws of the universe. In order to see and understand this, we need to change our perspective and realize that the way we have always categorized things is not the only way to categorize them, nor is it necessarily the best way. Religion is not practiced by burying oneself in past events, nor by dreaming of some future state, but by being the best that you can be right here and now, and by recognizing the work of the great creative force in everything around you. If you really want to practice properly the religion you choose, make mana and use it wisely and well for yourself and others. Aloha. Aloha.